Ladies and gentlemen, we are under attack. Our very way of life, our very existence is threatened. They have already taken over Washington. They continue to destroy our Constitution. It is time to take back our country now.
The Wise Conservative Show, bringing wisdom back to politics.
In what appears to be one of the most ironic moments of modern American politics, it seems the hardcore conservative voter continues to drive Hillary Clinton closer and closer to the Oval Office. Hello folks, my name is Dakota Wise. This is the Wise Conservative Show. It is good to be back after a week-long hiatus. Once again, the number to call in, 909-297-5812. Again, that number is 909-297-5812. So continuing with the general theme that we're going to be going with at the start of the show, I had to talk about something that I've witnessed that I find quite alarming in regards to the presidential race, particularly on the Republican side, and that is the militant nature of a lot of the Ted Cruz supporters, especially when it comes to what is still the probable candidate for the Republican Party, of course being Donald Trump. It seems that a lot of the Ted Cruz supporters have taken, once again, a very militant stance against Donald Trump. And they have outright come out and said that if Donald Trump wins the nomination, that they will not support him whatsoever. And that is dangerous for the party because having that large of a group of Republicans not supporting the candidate, it's going to absolutely guarantee a Democratic win. Now, here's the thing with a lot of these supporters. I should be excited by Ted Cruz. I should like what he's doing. But quite frankly, I just can't get excited about Ted Cruz. I can't get any enthusiasm about Ted Cruz. It's not that I don't like Ted Cruz. It's not that I don't like what Ted Cruz is saying. I just don't feel any momentum from Ted Cruz, and I don't think he fares very well in the general election. We've been promised the proverbial knight in shining armor before when it comes to the Conservative Party. We've been promised the perfect conservative candidate. And time again, that perfect candidate has wound up burning the American people and has wound up turning his back on the American people. Now, I'm not saying that Ted Cruz is guaranteed to do this, but too many times the American people have been burned by voting for the conservative candidate who was supposed to represent their interest the most. The 2016 general election would be the first time that Ted Cruz, if he was the nominee, it would be the first time that Ted Cruz faced the sustained task of winning over people who are not already in agreement with him and his entire political career. And up until this point, he has shown no skill at winning over independent and even some Democratic voters. He has shown no ability to do this whatsoever. And you can just look to the fact that in the open primaries, Donald Trump, without any sort of argument, without any sort of doubt, Donald Trump has excelled at the open primaries. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, has fared much better in the closed primaries, where only the hardcore conservative voters can go out and vote. And so Ted Cruz does very well with a select group of what many would consider to be the far-right Republicans. And now what I find somewhat alarming about Ted Cruz, he has represented himself as the next Ronald Reagan. But Reagan never forgot that to win the nomination, he had to represent the Republican Party as a whole, not just the far-right fringe of the party. Donald Trump has shown that even though he might not be the most conservative Republican out there, he is able to carry a very large portion of the Republican Party, and not only can he carry Republicans, he has shown that he is able to bring in independent voters, and he has shown that he is able to bring in Democratic voters. And this is absolutely essential to any Republican who is hoping to win the general election. Being able to generate a large support base is important, but what's more important and what wins elections is being able to win over the independent vote. And I don't see Ted Cruz doing that. I don't think he has the enthusiasm, and I think that in a lot of ways, he is just too focused. He's centered on the far-right Republican voter, and he doesn't represent the independent voter or those more centered towards the moderate side. Now, here's the thing with Donald Trump, and this is what drives the hardcore Republican voters crazy. It drives them crazy. Just yesterday, I was listening to Ben Shapiro's podcast. He's a great guy, and I agree with probably 90% of what he says. But in the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's really gone off on Donald Trump. And he's really pointed out the fact that, say, 4 to 8 years ago, Donald Trump might not have been the most conservative guy out there. But let's be honest, most of the American voters do not care that he may have contributed funds to a Democrat in the past. They don't care what his abortion stance was 30 years ago. It's, quite frankly, it's not even relevant to the debate that is at hand right now. People want someone who is going to stand up and fight for them. Ted Cruz has not been fighting for the majority of Republican voters. He's been fighting for the far right. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is much better at representing the moderate voters. Donald Trump is much better at representing the independent voters. But what is alarming about the militant nature of the Ted Cruz supporters is that if they absolutely outright refuse to vote for Donald Trump if he is the nominee, then he stands absolutely no chance and Hillary Clinton will be the next president. And what these people don't seem to understand, they seem like they don't want to vote for Donald Trump out of principle because he's not Republican enough for them. But Donald Trump is focusing on key issues, and on the key issues, he's much, much, much more conservative than Hillary Clinton. And I hear that a lot coming from Ted Cruz fans, that Donald Trump is practically Hillary Clinton. But there are key differences. For instance, on immigration, probably one of the most important issues in this current election cycle, Donald Trump has pretty much exactly the same plan. You could say Ted Cruz copied his plan. And so that's probably one of the most key voting areas for Donald Trump supporters, is that he's very conservative on immigration. Donald Trump has shown to be very conservative on military, on taking care of the veterans, on gun control, on taking out ISIS. All of these areas, he practically lines up and is pretty much offering the same thing as Ted Cruz. On the other hand, he might be a little more moderate, a little more progressive when it comes to social issues. That's what's going to win the independent vote, folks. What the Republican Party has failed to do is that they don't choose which battles they're willing to fight. Take, for instance, the fact that they're absolutely outright refusing to have the Senate hearings for Garland. I agree, we don't need to be nominating and electing a Supreme Court justice right now. But once you have a candidate, the Republican parties control both the Senate and the House. We could have the hearings and there would be absolutely no damage done if we just voted no for the guy. But now that the Republican leadership has decided that they are going to not just vote no on the nominee, they're going to outright refuse to have his hearings. Now that just makes the party look bad. It gives a lot of credible fuel to the fire when Democrats come out and say that the Republicans are being obstinate and that we're not willing to sit down and work with them. It adds a lot of fire. The Republican leadership makes it extremely easy for the Democrats to sit down and blame the Republicans for the for everything that's happening in Washington, for the shutting down of the government, for the obstruction. It makes it really easy to blame the Republicans for everything, because the Republicans are not willing to sit down and choose their battles. Times are changing, folks. And yes, the idea of conservatism is to try to keep the status quo. We don't want all these progressive changes. We don't want, Bernie Sanders in office. But we are fighting an uphill battle. There's no denying that. And it's only going to get harder and harder as the millennial generation continues to pick up the slack and continues to take control of the country. And in order to be successful in this battle, we are going to have to prioritize what is most important to us. And then, once we've chosen what's important to us, say the death penalty or gun control or religious freedom, once we've chosen these key issues that we won't be willing to give up, we need to allow wiggle room. We need to be able to compromise on some of the other issues. Compromise should not be a bad word in politics, as long as you keep your priorities straight. As long as you're not willing to compromise on the key issues, then you should be willing to compromise on maybe the lesser issues. That way the government works. Ronald Reagan, probably the Republican savior, Ronald Reagan was willing to compromise with the Democrats. Ronald Reagan started his political career as a California governor and was forced to work with a largely Democratic state legislator. And then, once he took over as president, he was again forced to work with a Democratic legislator in Congress. And probably the most important part about that is that Ronald Reagan was willing to compromise with them. He once told one of his aides on many occasions, "I'd rather get 80% of what I want than go over the cliff with my flag flying." Compromise. Even the Republican that so many of the candidates today look up to and try to imitate was willing to compromise with the Democrats. Now, the problem, and here's the reason that a lot of people don't want compromise right now, is that the Republican leadership has been compromising on issues that are very important to the conservative voter base. They aren't compromising on the things that are maybe less important. They've been compromising on key areas, such as spending, such as approving an omnibus spending bill that continues to throw the nation into debt. That's where things get, once you start compromising, things go wrong. But if you sit down and you prioritize what you want to fight for and what you're willing to compromise on, then the party runs a lot smoother, and you don't end up in this case where Republicans are seen as being the ones who are, hitting the brakes on the government train and slowing everything down to a halt. Compromise is what benefits the American people, and it's why we put the politicians in Congress. They're supposed to work together and find a solution. The far right making all the decisions in Washington is just as bad as the far left making all the decisions. That's why there's a mixture, and that's why we have a two-party system. It's compromise, folks. One thing stands out clear, though. One thing. The only loser in this election cycle is the American people. Now, I want everyone here. I'd play the audio, but it's a little bit long. And so I want everyone here, when you get a chance, go take a listen to the Ronald Reagan debates. And you'll soon realize there's absolutely no way around it. Those debates were boring as hell. But each candidate tried to represent themselves in a way that made them seem credible. And they obviously were not showing an obvious hatred for the other person on the stage. They sat up there and they debated like adults. It was Ronald Reagan who famously wrote the 11th commandment, "Thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican." And that's because Ronald Reagan understood that a party divided stood absolutely no chance against a Democratic challenger. I can almost guarantee, folks, that no matter who wins the Republican nomination, at this point, the winner will be alienating a very large portion of the voter base, no matter if it's Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, John Kasich, or whoever the GOP establishment might try to throw at us at a brokered convention. I can guarantee that no matter who it is, the Republican Party is going to be divided. We are practically handing Hillary Clinton the presidency on a silver platter. And I don't think there's a way at this point to save it. I really don't. I really, really don't. And that's simply because of the infighting and the unorganized nature of the Republican Party. It's fundamentally going through a changing period, and right now we can see the effects. That is what is pretty much driving the Ted Cruz-Donald Trump debate. You have two fundamentally different groups of people under the label of the Republican Party. And it's going to keep this infighting. There's going to keep being a weak Republican Party until we're able to figure this out. And so until then, we're going to have to keep putting up with these Democratic presidents, these Democratic, probably Congress at this point, until we figure out what the new Republican Party means. Folks, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. After the break, we're going to be talking about the sad state of our military. It's getting pretty bad. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Tune in to Millennials Rising, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday nights, for a conservative outlook on pop culture and American politics. Together we can reinstitute values back into our nation's young people and help create an alternative path away from the mainstream liberal agenda. Tune in to Millennials Rising, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday nights, only on Youth Revolt. The idea behind Youth Revolt is to let them, these liberal professors, let them know that we are here and we're ready to fight.
Youth Revolt. Speak without fear.
This is Dakota Wise, co-host of The Wise Conservative Show, here with an exclusive preview. I can guarantee that all of these illegal executive actions that President Obama has tried to take would be ruled legal, and the president would be allowed to legislate instead of executing the law that the Congress and the American people have put up in front of him. For more content, find us at Spreaker.com/TheWiseConservative.
How's it going, everyone? Jason Veely here. I want to tell you about YouthRevolt.org, the ultimate media network for young conservatives. Youth Revolt features a lineup of young radio hosts, columnists, and video bloggers. These are some of the most courageous and articulate millennials out there. Give them some support and check out YouthRevolt.org. YouthRevolt.org. Speak without fear.
Folks, you're listening to The Wise Conservative Show. The number to call in, again, phone lines are open, 909-297-5812. Again, that number is 909-297-5812. So this past weekend, I was watching a really great special on Fox News, Rising Threats, Shrinking Military. And it really outlined just how pathetic that President Obama has been handling the military, and just the sad state that our military is currently in. So it's no secret that one of the cornerstones of the Obama presidency has been the systematic reduction of the United States' ability to defend itself. The president has turned the military into a social experiment. It's really been distracted from its true purpose, and that is being ready to defend the country from any sort of attack. Instead, the president has turned it into a social experiment. That's the best way to describe it. Whether it was the repealing of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, whether it's now allowing women on the front lines, or any of the other social changes that have happened within the military, it's really distracted it from its true purpose of going in and killing the bad guys. There's absolutely no way around that. Take, for instance, I found this really shocking. Some of the ROTC programs around the nation were having their, I don't know if they're called cadets, their students, they had them dress up in high heels and walk, I don't know, like a half mile or something, and walk around campus in order to demonstrate the plight that females go through. This was the ROTC program, the program that's supposed to be developing the leaders for the military. And this is what they're spending their time doing. It really demonstrates just kind of how pathetic. There's no other way to describe it. The United States military at this point is pathetic. The military budget has been reduced by nearly 21% over the last 5 budget years. Experts are questioning the nation's naval supremacy and its ability to defend itself on the high seas. The Army has been shrunk to the lowest levels since World War II, and the Air Force has had to repeatedly reduce the number of F-22s and F-35s. Those are the next generation fighter jets we have. They've had to repeatedly reduce the number that we have ordered, simply due to the fact that we're cutting the budget. Now, there may have been some valid arguments as to why the military budget needed to be reduced 5 years ago. There might have been. But the results have shown to be dangerous. Let's take a look at, not all, because this list would go on forever. Let's take a look at some of the failures of the President Obama administration when it comes to handling foreign policy. And it's real interesting because the president seems to be so concerned with his legacy and ensuring that his legacy is positive. But when you look to his ability to handle foreign affairs, the only way to describe his legacy is failed. I mean, he joins Carter in the failed foreign policy club. Actually, Carter's probably happy because he's not the worst anymore. But let's take a look at some of these events. Number 1, the president's handling of the Arab Springs uprising that started in Egypt. He supported removing a pro-American regime, which was later replaced, though supposedly it was a democratic election, it was replaced by Islamic extremists in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, after which, again, that regime was taken out, and Egypt has gone through a host of regime changes since then. It's still in turmoil, and the president supported this. And then, if he didn't learn from his mistake and learn that generally taking out a dictator or taking out whoever's in charge of an area creates a power vacuum, well, he went to Libya and did it again. After not learning lessons from the past, the United States, under the direction of Barack Obama, supported the overthrowing of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And since then, the resulting power vacuum that developed in Libya has allowed ISIS and Al-Qaeda to develop a stronghold within the region. Libya's a mess. It led to Benghazi. All of that because we went in and took out, yeah, he was a bad guy, but people much, much worse came in and took his place. We can look to Iraq, and regardless of if you think we should have been in the region, once we were there, we had a responsibility to exit the region in a way that did not threaten the stability of the country. And despite the fact that the Iraqi government requested a stay-behind force of American soldiers, the president did not put in the work to negotiate any sort of deal, and we withdrew all our troops from the area. And this was after the Iraqi government admitted that they were not ready to handle the threats in the area posed by then the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Later, the Iraqis' inability to defend themselves, inability led to the development of ISIS in the region. If you look to how the president handled the increased tensions with Russia. Now, Putin is a bully. And the only way you can respond to a bully is with power. You can look back to World War II, and when Hitler was annexing nations, they tried this whole attitude of appeasement. We'll just give him what he wants and they'll stop. It doesn't work that way. And Putin, after his annexation of Crimea and the resulting civil war, where Russia was not, quote-unquote, helping the breakaway force, the rebels, the United States' handling of the situation again demonstrated to not only Putin, but the rest of the world, that we were no longer in a position of power. You can look at Syria, where the president drew a red line and stated that the United States would take action if chemical weapons were used in the civil war that was then just beginning to develop. Lo and behold, we had evidence of chemical weapons being used, and the president did absolutely nothing against it. Absolutely nothing. This was after standing up in front of the world and saying we would take action if chemical weapons were used, and we did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Time and time again, this president has shown that he's not willing to stand up and actually take action when he says something. Nothing at all. Look at ISIS. ISIS is different from the Taliban. ISIS is different from Al-Qaeda in the fact that we know a defined area. ISIS is practically a nation. We know where they are. They're not hiding. And we still have not been able to destroy a group of 30,000 men, something that we should be easily capable of, and yet under this president, we have allowed them to continue to spread terror, not just throughout the United States. No, they have continuously attacked our allies, the people that we're supposed to defend, and the president has allowed them to get away with this. And he comes in with the excuse that it needs to be changed from these Arab nations. The time for an Arab-led coalition has gone and passed. Right now, the United States needs to take action and step up to the plate. The rest of the world looks to the United States to be a leader. Yet the president has shown that he almost views the United States military as an object of evil that needs to be dismantled and destroyed. He has shown time and time again that he believes the United States is fundamentally an evil and corrupt and wrong, backwards nation that needs to be fixed. And it really leaves me wondering. Every action that Barack Obama has taken has demonstrated that he really hated the United States, that he hated everything about us, our military, our culture, everything about it. Why did he want to be president so badly of a nation that he hated? He said that he was going to fundamentally change the nation, and I'm afraid that he has, and it's not for the better, folks. It's not for the better. So with that pretty much wraps up this episode of The Wise Conservative. I thank you for tuning in. Again, I'd like to apologize for that week-long hiatus we had. But we're back. We'll be back again on Thursday with Connor leading the podcast. Again, that's Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, I believe. Go check out us on youthrevolt.org. You can find us on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Dakota Wise. God bless.